My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sangharan, Guru Piranyo, fellow Yanis. Today I'm going to continue Mahan's teachings on the second principle. And the last satsang I spoke about Swamiji's teaching on his philosophy on, how he talks about becoming transcendental to one's material existence, how I spoke about there are two parts to us. One is the material I, which is small I or material body. And then we've got the universal or transcendental, body that we have, which is the big I. So then Swamiji goes on to, in the next passage on page 18, he goes on to speak about what is it that we need to do to acquire this understanding, right? So he says, look, whatever you do, whatever you search for, you need to have evidence and proof. And here, Swamiji takes a very scientific approach. Everybody talks about Godhood, God realization, this and that, and all those things. It all looks very abstract and very theoretical. And Swamiji here says that, one needs to first be able to know what is it that they're seeking, and then find out how to seek it, and then measure whether what you have got is the experience that you are seeking. And finally, he says that how do you know that you have attained the right thing? So this is something that in his next quote he speaks about. So he speaks about, he says, finding out of the Godhead in man is just like doubting many inmates of a mansion before detecting the thief among them. So, he gives these examples. He says that, you are in a house and there are many people living in that mansion, and somebody is missing something or something is stolen. How do you find out who has taken it? And this is where you see his scientific approach comes. He says to establish the theft, one requires several clear proofs. So think of this way, that if you say this is what God realization is, then you have to have proof that this is what God realization is, right? And he sets the stage. He says, so similar to when one attains self-realization, it has to be explained. You have to be able to explain what it is. You can't say it's somewhere in the sky and this and that and all those things. One needs to experience, and when you experience it, you can explain it better. And you need to ensure that what you have experienced is the real thing. What does it real mean, right? And so again, what is it that you have set in your axiom? That means this is what self means. This is what, God means. This is what divinity means. So you need to define what that is, and then devise a method to be able to experience it, and then document that experience, and then see whether that experiences leads to the outcomes that you want. Somewhat like a scientist, right? You have a particular hypothesis, and then, whether something is blue or white or red or whatever, you see, and then you devise an experiment to be able to validate what is it that you are seeing, whether the hypothesis is right or wrong, or it's an alternate. So this step of setting up the experiments and to experience it is what we call the self-inquiry, and the self-inquiry ultimately leads one to the self-realization. So here Swamiji says that to establish this theft, one requires several clear proofs. So you are going to, capture this person who has taken something, then you need to have clear proof that these are the evidence that is showing. Similarly, when you say that one attains self-realization, you need to have clear evidence and experiences that you have that gives you that realization, and the achievements that you've got there with such realization. So Swamiji then walks through this, and this is something that you see that most will say, look, this is what it is, but they don't tell you how one can achieve this. Now, remember, these is in the chapter of the thought. So one could ask the question, what do we mean? Why is this being, in this chapter thought? And you see that all the experiences that he's talking about, what is thought? Thought is actually a measure of experience, right? So the question then is that what is, when we say self-realization, what do we mean by self-realization? And really trying to understand what the self means. There's a lot of discussion on what this self means, I means. What is it really? Let's break it down to what do we mean by this, right? And once we know what this is, what the quality of this is, then we say, okay, how do we know that what we're experiencing is not that? And how do we know that what we're experiencing is that? So this is where we have to start, more rationalizing and using the scientific approach. And this is consistent with our discussion on the spiritual compass, right? If self is what this is, self-realization, then how do we use logic and scientific approach to calibrate us towards that journey? And are we getting closer to that? So it is somewhat like, I'm not sure if you know this character in most of the thing. Do you know who this character is? It's a very important character. This character is known as Sherlock Holmes. And I'm not sure if you know who Sherlock Holmes is. Whenever there is a mystery or whenever there is a crime that is committed or, murder or whatever, Sherlock Holmes will look at the evidence and then set the experiments and all those, looking at the evidence carefully, true, noker, intensively collecting all the information, relevant information, piece it together and say, I know who committed the crime. So in that same way, we have to, if we want to know what we are made out of, what is it that gives us all these things, these experiences, we need to be like Sherlock Holmes. So the great saints and sages were somewhat like that. They were very, very, they wanted to be able to understand what this is, find out clear proofs. Is this what real is? So it's quite interesting. In one of the scriptures, Upanishads, it says that, is this what it is? It says no. Is this what it is? It's no. And everything is no, no, no. And ultimately it comes to, what is it real? So I'll walk through that step with you. So it is not about the ultimate discovery that you're looking for. The most important thing is that how does one prepare the mind for this journey, right? So it is not whether you validate a hypothesis or not, but what steps you take to do that validation, and that's more important. Most people want to know, I want to know God, and they go after that without thinking through what are the steps that I need to get there. So when we want that mind, which is the faculty that generates all the thoughts, to understand why it generates the thought, or how it generates the thought, or what is a universal thought, or what is self-inquiry or self-exploration, there are a few qualities that one needs, and the qualities is somewhat like Sherlock Holmes, or somewhat like the qualities of Mahan. So, and I used to like a lot of mystery, and somewhat I saw this journey that Mahan took was a mystery himself. And I've seen him in person too. Sometimes you say, okay, this is a very interesting problem. And you think about it very quickly. You think about it over a few days. It's called rumination. Then you come back and say, I know, I understand this process, this principle behind this. Right? So it'll be in his mind, always preoccupied in his mind. It'll be simmering and sometimes very quiet. And then he say, I figured it out. Right? So what I realized from this, to find out the Godhood in us, to find out the self, And the mind, to be able to discover itself, the mind needs to be, acquiring several qualities. And you ask yourself whether you have these qualities, and whether you have the qualities or not will determine whether you understand something better or not. So here are the qualities that Sherlock Holmes, or the qualities of a Mahan, that requires. This is, how do we establish our mind to search for that clear proof that what existence is all about, or what this God realization is all about, or self-realization. And this is something that most people don't do. They don't prepare for this, right? And if you see, a good scientist will have this quality. So a good scientist, a good a Mahan who's really, really enlightened, the steps that they've taken, or Sherlock Holmes, these are the qualities. Number one is that the first quality that they have is the hunger to know why something is this. Hunger to know. There are many people that are not hungry to know. When I mean, sometimes they say, okay, I want to know it, but that's, okay. But there are some that, I want to really, really, really know this. And I cannot sleep if I don't find out what this is. You see? And this hunger to know is very nicely stated by Mahan in Tamil. He says, Kudal pasi, udal pasi, ullatin pasi. He says, there's a pang of hunger for food. When you have that hunger for food and your body is really, really, the sugar levels have gone down and you're just in a state of shivering, right? And it's hunger for food. The moment you drink something or eat something, the body gets revived. I'm not sure how many of you have experienced this, when it is so low that the body, you're having cold sweat and your body is just about to give way, and somebody gives you a drink or something to eat, and there's a jolt that takes place in the body, right? The metabolism just kicks out. That itself, it's like an enlightening experience, right? But most of us are always eating something, so we don't feel that jolt, right? So the second one is that, when one wants a relationship, and you see there's a lot that many people are, hungering for love and hungering for, relationships. And you see that sometimes when they don't get it, it becomes so difficult for them. But when they acquire something, that relationship, it's another exhilarating and inspiring experience. So those two can be met quite easily. But the ullatin pasi, that inner search, this wanting to know who we are, that hunger for knowing something, very rarely people have that, that really, they cannot sleep, and he says that the qualities of the Mahan or the Sherlock Holmes or great scientists is that this thing is always there in their mind, constant, persistently, right? And if you see Sherlock Holmes, he will be continuously, pursuing it, nothing distracts him. So he says that is an important quality if you want, because then it gives you focus, right? And the second aspect is actually about and asking a lot of questions, and this is something that is very important. When you take this path, you see that you start asking a lot of questions because you want to understand things better. You want to know, right? And I hope that when you all of you all started the satsang, some of you all a year and a half ago, that you are hungering for this knowledge and you're asking a lot of questions yourself. Why is this? How is this? And you have become a lover of knowledge. Number two is become lover of knowledge, that you really start seeking, investing time and resources to acquire this knowledge, right? And sometimes you go to the end of the world to actually acquire this knowledge, right? And that's the kind of pangs of inner thirst that one needs to have. And you see that these are some of the signs that, slowly it's veering you to the knower. So the knower is that self. And as the mind starts recalibrating and refocusing, it is starting to wanting to know the knower. To know the knower, it has to know many things. And this is where the questions start coming. You start seeking these questions, and then you become inquisitive. Hey, why is this like this? Why is that phenomena like this? And you become really inquisitive. And so the inquisitiveness is that you're starting to have that inner search, and you're starting to relate everything to what you see, what you hear. That inquisitiveness becomes, hey, I want to know more about this Mahan. I want to know about these teachings, pull out this, start reading and making notes and things. So the mind is starting to become, rumination, like what Mahan does, the inquisitiveness. And there's a sense of persistence, that continuously searching, pulling out, researching, and all those things starts coming in. And you start seeing that slowly, as you push deeper and deeper, the proof is, in that intensity, you start discovering about yourself. You ask the question, hey, before I was not interested in this, now I want to know more. I'm reading Mahan's book and all the other books. I want to, and you're willing to commit time for the self-exploration. You're willing to, and the commitment is not 5% or 10, it's 100%. Continuously, whether you are doing things or working, it's continuously. And that is because I used to ask this question, suddenly I'm more interested in this. Why am I? And then it starts reflecting, actually, I am seeking the knower. And the knower is attracting me inward, like gravity, pulling me away from that gravity of materiality to know the knower. And that is why the knowledge, seeking that knower, the wisdom, knowledge, the hunger is there. And you can start seeing the changes in you that takes place, that instead of reading other, things or watching programs that are not really, very materialistic, you start veering from there and starting to read more deeper, eternal, things, and start watching programs, listening to things. So you're starting to see your mind is starting to recalibrate to know the knower. You see? And then something very interesting happens. Another interesting thing happens is that you are willing to do research, right? You start researching, hey, Mahan said this, I heard this somewhere else too, and you start, hey, where did I hear this? Maybe my parents told me before, so it didn't connect. Now it's starting to connect. So you start researching. Researching means what? The word research. Research means that you have always known. You are now searching it. So the word research is you are researching yourself. You've always known about it. You're always the knower. And you have forgotten that journey because you've entrenched and drenched in materiality. You've forgotten your spirituality. So that research of wanting to know the knower and searching the right knowledge and the right masters enables you to research about the knower in you, and that research leads you to the ultimate search that you're searching, which is the knower itself. So you see that, and then you start, reviewing everything that you do in that context. You start reflecting, and more importantly, you start putting that into practice. Everything that you do is now connected in the connected state. How is this relevant to me? And so you see that the mind that is outward is starting to now go inward. And this is something that, and something very interesting happens here is that your mind starts becoming more creative, finding ways to get to the knower, in more creative and innovative ways. Right? So, and you see that as you are still preoccupied with this, you remember that many people tell, Guru, when I'm sitting for meditation, all my material thoughts come. Everything is haunting, from the Roti Canai to the Naslama to, my bank accounts and all those things is because you're still entrenched in the materiality. But the moment you you have that hunger for knowledge and asking a lot of questions, becomes a lover of this eternal knowledge. The inquisitiveness comes in, the persistence comes in, willing to do that exploration and that research. Slowly, slowly, you see that the material things that haunted you will slip in the background. And all you see is that you're gravitating towards inward. The gravity of materiality weakens and the gravity of the knower becomes stronger, and you start experiencing, hey, the focus becomes more and more. Wherever people give satsangs on self, you are there. Whenever you are reading something, you see that before out of 10 things that you read, maybe 9 things is about shopping catalogs or this and that and all those things, material things. But now you see that, maybe 2 or 3 of that is there, but 7 to 8 of them are about spirituality, about the knower in you. So you see that when that happens, your mind becomes more and more creative. The mind becomes more and more sublime. The mind becomes more and more quiet because you're now moving inward to that more quietude, part as opposed to the noisy material. And you can sense that in yourself, right? So this is the journey so this is some of the proofs that you're starting to get. Hey, before I spent most of my time on shopping catalogs or shopping and material things. I still do that because I still have to do things. But now I am more focused on my spiritual realization. And I start getting some interesting experiences. And I'll walk through with you some of the interesting experiences. Number one is that you become creative. You can understand things and you can associate things and you can put things together. 3 or 4 concepts, you put it together, you're able to put it together and have a better understanding of things, right? So you have that associations and the relationships because something interesting happens in your brain. When your mind becomes more quieter in search of the knower, all the material world behind, steps back. The neural connectivity now becomes relieved from that material, it's that sapping all the energy. Now it's now put into the inward journey and you start understanding the knower and the relationship between the knower, the known, and the knowing process. So we see that things become more clearer, and you become more creative, right? And this is something very interesting that happens. I'll come back to there's a clarity of thought, ability to understand, ability to rationalize, and ability to make sense of things. Before you could not understand. So one of the signs of proof that you are getting closer is that things make sense. Before you are just following it dogmatically, before you are just, somebody told you something, you follow it, So now you don't take things for granted. You ask a lot of questions and you're able to rationalize it using scientific and more, deeper understanding, and we see that you're able to, this makes sense. You read a scripture, this very clear. You read other scriptures, is very clear. So sense of clarity, ability to understand and rationalize becomes clear. Those are some of the clear proofs. The second one is that you start getting interest and enthusiasm. You start asking a lot more questions, a lot more, and when you have that understanding, you have a sense of calmness and the coolness. In that calmness, because it becomes more aware, all these queries and questions all disappears. And when all of that disappears, sometimes you are in an elevator, there's no thinking at all happening. Sometimes you're brushing your teeth, you're in motion, the mind is empty. Not empty in the sense that there's a sense of serenity, there's a sense of quietude that takes place in your mind, right? And you suddenly think, hey, there's no thought here at the present moment. So, and you feel so connected. So this is some of the telltale signs of as you're getting closer and closer to the knower. A sense of quietude, right? A sense of silence. So, And another interesting thing that happens is that you start doing thought experiments, right? You know, there are things that you can do. As a scientist, you would do experiments. When you inquire and when you're inquisitive, you say, okay, let me test this, let me test that. But as a spiritualist, as someone, you start doing thought experiments. And here are some of the thought experiments that I used to do, right? So the mind is so quiet and it wants to make sense of everything. Then he asks the question, what is existence? Do I exist when I'm awake or do I exist when I'm sleeping? What does existence really mean, right? So what happens in deep sleep? What happens in deep meditation? What happens when I'm awake? So you start doing all kinds of thought experiments. And then you get to the bottom of it. Hey, you know, in deep sleep, the material world does not exist, but I still exist. That is why I can say that I had a fantastic sleep, because when I say I have had a fantastic sleep, it means that the entire material world folded in me, that it becomes, completely quiet, that I feel so relieved of not having form and being in that formless. So in that formless and the form, the only thing that exists is that I, because that is why I said I had a fantastic sleep. So you start, I was existing, you know, in deep sleep, I existed in the material action world. The only permanent thing is I, that experiencer, that knower, right? Then you start asking questions. What is death? What dies? What does not die? So you run the thought experiment, like what I did last satsang. Then you start seeing, what is seeing? I am seeing things. Is the seeing taking place outside me or inside me? So a whole range of thought experiments that you go through. You take a compass, your compass shows you the direction to the North Pole. If I'm on North Pole, what would the compass show, right? So all these, so your mind starts exploring and doing the thought experiment to lead you to where? Ultimately, all of this leads you to that knower. You devise new thought experiments. In my own journey, 100 over thought experiments that I developed, myself, to convince, hey, I'm getting closer. And never in my mind I ever thought about this until this journey commenced, right? But this requires, as I say, hunger for knowledge, all the conditions I spoke about. Right? Ask yourself, have you ever done the thought experiments yourself of your own existence, right? So somebody talks about how you slowly find the proof through these thought experiments, through this research, and slowly, some of the achievements, now I understand things better. Now I understand who I am. You feel more relieved, more calmer, more, composed, more confident who you are, not perturbed by any disease, poverty, ridicule, whatever I say. Nothing touches the me in me, the knower in me. So this is a fantastic journey that you go through. And then sometimes when things are written in a very complex way, you're able to decipher it. I'm going to show you this in the next part of Swamiji's teachings, which is, if you see on page 18, he speaks about the expression of exaltation. Exaltation means, the whole idea of when you get there, you understand things. It's just poof. As I was telling you, the body is so starved. When the first nourishment goes, there's a reawakening, right? And the same thing when you are when not, you never, for many months, you've never talked to anyone. You're in isolation. The first person you see, wow, you want to talk to them, right? You're so excited to meet them, right? In that same way, you are longing for this knower, and the moment you acquire it, boom, it's like, that someone you knew for a long time, but you have not experienced them or know them, and you just want to embrace it. And you see that when you have that, the kind of mindset you'll get. I'm going to explain to you when that happens, how the mind becomes so powerful to be able to understand the wisdom, knowledge of masters that have written this in their inspirational ecstasy state to explain this beautiful, concept. So I'm going to take you through this now. This, I'm sure some of you all would have seen this statement. I don't think I'll be able to do all of it, but I will do some of it. So here it is on page Mahan's exaltation, expression of exaltation. Wow, this awesomeness, right? This discovery of this wonderness. And Swamiji writes, has swiftness any sorrow? Now, for an ordinary person, they will figure out, what is this? What does that really mean when Swamiji says, has the swiftness any sorrow? Right? I'm just going to give you a few for you to think about how a mindset that is discovered this awesomeness and expresses it in a way that is, an ordinary mind would not be able to decipher. Only an enlightened mind would be able to decipher this. What does he mean by has swiftness any sorrow? Swiftness means the ability to change rapidly, to be agile, to be adaptable. That's what he means here. Agility and adaptability he's talking about. When you attain that knower, the knowing process, no matter what the circumstances, the mind is agile and adaptable to any circumstances. Death, poverty, disease. So he speaks about that agility of the mind to become transcendental to any sorrow. And he says that one of the qualities of you experiencing that self-realization, or know that you have attained the self-realization, is that the mind can recalibrate, adjust, adapt to any sorrow, including, death, disease, poverty, and, in that calmness, the mind has the ability, the flexibility, the shock absorbers to achieve this. That is what the first sentence is saying. Has swiftness any sorrow? When the mind is swift, does it have any sorrow? It can adjust. This is where, sometimes you hear in great books and sayings, where this shall pass too. The good things and the challenging things will all pass. So the mind has this ability to be adaptable. This is the first. The second one is love any disrespect. When you have unconditional love, here when I'm talking about, that attainment of that self-realization, not conditional love. Most people have conditional love, and this is where they get themselves into trouble. I do this for you, I'm expecting this, right? Sometimes you see among parents, they look after the children, then the parents want the children to look after them, and if the children don't do it, they get disappointed. So what he's saying here is that when one attains this quality, you have unconditional love. And that unconditional love has no disrespect or does not have any blemishes. Right? And this is why you see that Mahan, when he acquired this knowledge, he disseminated this knowledge to everyone without any condition. As a matter of fact, he made it, he was so, he realized that it's difficult for people to acquire this knowledge. He made it very simple. He gave it in a form of a tablet form, like, 3 steps, how you get there, right? So this is the question that you need to ask, right? How do you know you're getting closer? How do you know you're getting closer to the self? Is your mind agile? Do you permeate unconditional love, right? The third aspect is knowledge any fault, right? If you acquire the true knowledge, the wisdom knowledge will not find anything wrong or right, something is wrong or right, or sin. There's no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as bad, good and bad. Everything, the knowledge says that both when you have, light, you also have darkness. This duality is always present everywhere. Without one, you don't have the other. So you see that, most people want sukha, but they don't want dukkha. They want good things, but they don't want challenging things. But a wise one will say both sukha and dukkha are equally important. The dukkha makes us work harder. The sukha gives us, we count our blessings and gracefully accept. So he says that true knowledge has any fault? No, there's no blemishes, right? In anything. That is why you see that, I don't like to use the word sin. It's just not illumined. You see, and you see that the choices of word Mahan uses very, very carefully done. So knowledge, any fault. If you truly acquire the wisdom knowledge, there is no fault or blemish. The same thing. So you see that the mind is starting to make that leap on going deeper and understanding, a deeper, we use our mind, we use it for lower order thinking. Most often it's lower order. This is higher and deeper order thinking, that because you've got to go higher and deeper to unravel that self. Another one is fire and coal. He asked this question, is there a difference between fire and coal? Is fire in coal and cold in fire? Think about it really carefully. I thought about this. If you look at pitch, darkness of space is so cold. Yet within that space of coldness, you have, suns and galaxies and stars that have tremendous, temperature. So we see that one in the other. So what he's saying is that, they're all integrated as one, like Sukha and Dukkha. There are differences, they are all one. They're all seamlessly integrated as one. In that same way, you see that he weaves this material reality and the spiritual realities all weaved as one. Ipparamum, apparamum, ega paraparamum ennunamdite. So he's explaining this mindset, right? The same thing is any sound and any solitudes, sound, what does it mean by, you have a lot of, vibrations and noise, and yet you have that solitude, quietude. How is this comparable? He says that all this sound comes from that solitude. The base is that unarve from the soul. The soul, has, zero. The vibration is universal and zero, but yet from there, everything's unraveled, right? So in deep sleep, without deep sleep, the whole material reality cannot exist. So he says, sound and solitude are integrated, as one. The same thing, he goes on to primordial and any destructions. Without destructions, we have this, birth and dissolution and everything. And you see that we think destruction is bad. It's part and parcel of the primordial, because without destruction, you don't have growth. Without death, there is no birth, right? So he weaves this through things. The primordial is the transcendentality. So that cycle of change is happening in the changeless. Now, when you look at this, an ordinary person would not be able to understand. What he's saying here is that our entire cycle of life, which is, you have birth, sustenance, dissolution, is all happening on that primordial transcendental being, and that is the being that I've just discovered, that is unraveling everything, right? So the same thing, he talks about darkness, any comparison, and you think about it very carefully. See, the mind has become so, most people associate darkness with negativity, right? And here he speaks about, this darkness, this darkness he speaks about this darkness as that which you cannot create. It's omnipresent. It is present everywhere, right? It is omnipresent in everything. And if you see the earlier satsangs, this darkness is essentially that infinite possibilities and potentiality he's talking about. This thing that you cannot create, nor can you, destruct, is omnipresent. Is there anything that is comparison to that? An example of that darkness is that in deep sleep state, we are getting into that irul state, and that is the base state that gives existence, real meaning, right? Another example is that the sunlight would not have any meaning if there was no pitch darkness in the background, right? So he says that darkness is the mosaic behind all existence. And the last one is that the why is any equal. He says, nothing is equal to wisdom. You can put tons of money, you can tons of gold on one side of the, when you have that balance, right? You can put as much material things, it will still be lower than wisdom. The wisdom carries so much weight. As a matter of fact, without wisdom, you cannot generate anything, any of the capital, right? So here I spoke over the 10 capitals, right? The first capital is spiritual capital, wisdom. This is, there's nothing equal to wisdom, right? So what that tells us is that our focus, our priority should be knowing the knower and acquiring the wisdom, knowledge to know the knower. If we know that, our life becomes more enlightened, more enriched, and more universal. I've just taken first half of this Swamiji's teachings, this part, and I just want to demonstrate to you what happens to your mind as you make this inner journey, that you are able to understand your own reality, which is much more richer and much more universal and much more transcendental, that is described by Swamiji. If you don't understand this, that tells me, or that should tell you that, hey, I need to do a lot more work, a lot more, things such as, spending more time, reading, reflecting, ruminating, acquire knowledge, become more inquisitive, asking a lot of questions, being more persistent. I need to do a lot more to be able to uncode many of these great things that these great masters have discovered. In the discovery, that exaltation that they get, wow, this is what it all means. So I've given you the first part, and the next part, which is I will cover next week, I want you to think in that way so that you start much more deeper, that he takes you that, in no thought, nothing exists. What does this all mean? So he's taking us through this mental and intellectual journey. As we go deeper and deeper, he's showing how our mind starts expanding, becoming more universal. And you will be able to understand this. Nobody else may know this, but say, hey, now this makes sense. I can associate, I can connect things. I can connect things better because I am connected to the knower. I am the knower. And the knower connects everything and is connected to everything. And this is the experience. And finally, you can come back to, I got it. This is what I got philosophy is. Sandosham.